Thursday, May 9, 2019, meeting of the Indian River County Planning and Zoning Commission. First order of business will be the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? None? Approval of the minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion been approved by Dr. Day, second by Mr. Landers. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? It's unanimous. Next order of business is a public hearing. It's a consideration of a request by Garrett Gaudreau to amend the Land Development Regulations, Section 923.07, piers, docks, and boat slips, by revising a 400 square foot footprint restriction on unwalled boat shelters to be consistent with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and other jurisdictional agencies requirements, LDRA-19-07-01, 2017-110-127-84336. This matter is legislative. Stan?
I'll turn it over to Roland.
Good job, Stan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I'm Roland DeBlois, County Chief of Environmental Planning and Code Enforcement. I do have a PowerPoint presentation to refer to. Just some background. Dating back to 1991 to Indian River County's land development regulations, we've had a limit on the size of unwalled boat shelters over water for a footprint not to exceed 400 square feet. Prior to that time, in your packet, you've seen included the minutes from when that actually was adopted back in 1991. And if you look through the minutes, there's some discussion that prior to 1991, it really wasn't addressed having boat shelters over water, though there were some that existed, considered grandfathered at the time. There was an applicant who was trying to get square on one that he was applying for, so it was a topic of discussion. And at that time, again, as reflected in the minutes, the reasons for adopting it were essentially to allow the unwalled boat shelters over water, but in a regulated manner. Another main part of the discussion was in doing so, to be consistent with state and other jurisdictional agency requirements, particularly the state. And also to establish a size limit so that there's some kind of, doesn't get out of control from a scale standpoint or water coverage standpoint. At that time, if you look again, what the minutes reflect was the state itself was going through a period of adjustment on what it was going to allow as far as sizes. And in the end, the 400 square feet that the county ended up adopting at the time was consistent with what the state was requiring at the time. Just recently, Mr. Gaudreau, who owns a dock on North Indian River Drive, he has an existing dock, but he applied through the state to expand his dock and to put a 976 square foot unwalled boat shelter over 2 combined boat slips and lifts. And he got his state approval to do that through the state's current allowances and regulations. When he came to the county for the follow-up permit, he ran into the 400 square foot limitation, and there was a discussion at that time saying, well, you know, that's not consistent with the state. Would you consider, or would the county consider updating its regulations to be consistent with the state? And in that mode, he's applied for this amendment to the county's regulations. Here's a picture of his existing dock prior to expansion. And you can kind of see the scale of it in relationship to other docks in the area. This again is on North Indian River Drive on the west side of the river. Under his proposed design, he's extending his dock somewhat, but the main point for today's discussion is he's proposing this unwalled shelter over 2 boat lifts, which again meets the state requirements. And as indicated, the combined area under roof is calculated, looking at the two together, was 976 square feet over the 400 square feet the county has currently on books. Just for reference, the overall dock structure as proposed by Mr. Goodrose and approved by the state was 1,937 square feet over water, which is, I'm referencing that because another requirement of the state, which I'll get into right now, well, there's two, I'll mention it in a second, but right now, we looked at the state statutes, particularly Florida Statute Section 258, which is a .42, which is specific to aquatic preserves. And in 2010, in researching the history of the statute, 2010, that statute was revised to specifically reference roofs over boat lifts, and the wording as it was revised and is now exists indicates that roofs were allowed over boat lifts, provided the roof does not overhang more than 1 foot beyond the footprint of the lift and the boat stored at the lift. Now, if you cross-reference that with Florida Administrative Code 62-330.427, that part of the administrative code, which is essentially the FDP, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection rules for administrating state laws. That section relates to specifically the general permits for docks, piers, and associated structures. In 2018, they revised that code section to cross-reference the Florida statute size limit on shelters. But if you read the whole section, it specifically pulls that into the total calculation of the dock coverage over water. And what it says is, such roofs, in combination with the overall dock structure over water, shall not exceed 2,000 square feet. And that's essentially, I looked at Mr. Goudreau's permit that he got for his dock expansion. That's specifically in one of the conditions of the permit, is a standard requirement of the state when they, DEP, when they issue permits. And as I mentioned earlier, his is under that amount. I think it was 1,937, which is essentially to the same scale as most of the other docks that have been permitted in the area. So the proposed revision is essentially to revise the specific section of our Coastal Management Ordinance, Chapter 932, as it relates to unwalled boat shelters. And it's essentially to eliminate the 400 square foot limitation and replace it with essentially the same wording that DEP now has, which is to allow the shelters to extend 1 foot beyond the footprint of the lift and the boat stored at the lift. And specifically, again, this is right from Florida's statute, or the administrative code and the statute. Such shelters shall not include the square footage calculation of the terminal platform. What we did not change in this section is we have a separate requirement related to observation piers and fishing piers where there's no boat mooring allowed just for observation. There's still a limitation of 160 square feet, which is essentially the size of the terminal platform. So this would only apply to docks with boat lifts and boat slips. Now, if you look at that revision in the context of other county requirements that are not proposed to change, there are limitations still that would apply to unwalled boat shelters. For example, we currently require and still will require that the applicant will demonstrate that the shelter does not adversely impact aquatic resources such as seagrasses. We still have a height limit of 20 feet, which is currently in the code. We still have requirements that it be located so it doesn't encroach into riparian setbacks that the county's established between properties. And also we have a 25% projection limit within a width of a waterway just to account for navigation, which mostly comes into play on canals. So when staff reviewed it, ultimately when we looked at it, our findings were that the amendment would make the county's boat shelter size limit more consistent with the state's and other jurisdictional agency requirements that have evolved since we've adopted our requirement back in '91. It would reasonably enhance but adequately regulate private riparian rights. When we looked at it, we assessed it to make sure that it made sense and it wasn't an over allowance. And in the end, we think that it's a reasonable allowance. And we also concluded that there'd be minimal environmental impacts due to other existing county and state requirements that would continue to apply, such as the ones I had just referenced. So we're bringing this to the commission today, really under 3 alternatives of action to make recommendations. This would go to the county commission for the ultimate approval through their public hearing. But the alternatives would be to adopt the amendment as proposed, which is what we showed, or to adopt the amendment with the modifications. Since we did the staff report, staff has considered, and we're now recommending, with reference to the 2,000 square foot limitation overall that the state has, in thinking about it, we're supporting that actually be pulled into the county's regulations so that we have an ultimate cap as well. So we're slightly changing our recommendation that we had in the report. Or the third alternative would be to deny the amendment. And again, our staff recommendation as modified, as I just explained, is that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend that the Board of County Commissioners adopt the LDR amendment as presented, but modified to include a 2,000 square foot overall dock area over water limit, which is consistent with the state. And that's our presentation.
Alman, any questions? Questions?
I have some questions.
Please, then.
I was waiting to see if anybody else would ask questions first, but first question is to the county attorney. The state allows up to 2,000 square feet. Is there anything that preempts or prohibits this county from adopting something less than that 2,000 square feet?
I'm not aware of any preemption of the local government being able to restrict it to a smaller size. Obviously, we would not be able to authorize something larger than what the state permits, but I'm not aware of anything that would prohibit the county from adopting a more tighter restriction.
Thank you. And I'll just keep going to my questions unless anybody would like to jump in, please do. Informational question. All of this seems to be tied to boat lifts. And I'm scratching my head to understand, if there's no boat lift, do these rules apply? In fact, one of the things that you showed there referred to the prior statute as referring to boat lift statute or boat lift regulation, whatever it was. But that's my question. Do you have to have a boat lift before any of what we're talking about applies?
I mean, it's when we look at the statutes, and I think the actual wording is in your backup, it does specifically make reference to boat lifts. So I think it is arguable that, yeah, you need to have a boat lift in order to have the shelter.
Okay.
I mean, again, I'll just read, I have it, let me just make a quick reference again. Under the 258 statute, slips of private residences which contain boat lifts a day which shall not float, etc., or be enclosed by walls, but may be roofed if the roof does not overhang more than 1 foot beyond the footprint of the lift and the boat stored at the lift. And when it's reflected in the,
So as far as you know, what we're talking about then is roofs over boat lifts. Okay. Again, an informational question. You mentioned that this applies in aquatic preserves, but not outside aquatic preserves. And you then make a comment in the memo that outside the aquatic preserves would be, for example, man-made canals. I went back to the LDRs earlier today, just trying to find a definition for aquatic preserves to understand where this applies, if any place other than the lagoon. And I couldn't find a definition. Maybe there is one that I just couldn't find, but what is an aquatic preserve? Where does this apply?
the aquatic preserves are established by the state, so it's the state.
I'm sorry, what now?
The state, it's a state designation, so the state establishes the boundaries. For our purposes, and as the preserves are in Indian River County, you're essentially looking at, just generally speaking, Indian River Lagoon proper. There's a section of Vero Beach right downtown that's not included, but virtually all the unincorporated county of the lagoon is in an aquatic preserve. It's not just one big aquatic preserve, there's different ones. And the Sebastian River also is considered part of aquatic preserve. So it is essentially the canals that come off of the main river that would not be included. But the main river itself, essentially if it's a shoreline into the main river, that's generally where the aquatic preserve is.
Okay.
And when we look at this, even though the states are specific to the aquatic preserve, from our perspective, in our code, we're proposing that we pull those in, but we also apply them outside the aquatic preserve. So it would apply in the canals.
So if we make this change, it would apply in, for example, the fingers down here, Vero Shores, whatever it's called.
That's our position and that's our understanding, yes. So we're taking it beyond what the state requires. They limit it to aquatic preserve. We're saying that's a good, we accept that as a reasonable approach, and we think it's appropriate that be pulled into the canal areas as well.
Has this county, in the past, had any significant level of requests for boat shelter or for shelters over boat lifts up in the 2,000 square foot range?
No, I mean, I think that this shelter here that's being proposed is about the biggest that we're aware of. And again, the 2,000 is the overall dock.
I understand.
So we have issued, they're not as regular as docks themselves. You get a lot more docks without boat shelters than you do. So percentage-wise, there's a lower percentage just because of the cost, among other things. The 400 square foot has worked in like Sebastian River. It's a matter of scale. Once you get on the main lagoon, there's an opportunity for more. But this is, that we've seen, this is probably one of the bigger ones that we've seen. So this is, again, combined 976 square feet.
You made the change, as I understand it tonight, from the combined square footage of the shelter and the terminal part of the dock to now the shelter and the entire dock over water. Is that correct?
Right, that specifically relates to the 2,000 square foot overall combined limit.
What's included in that
Right,
calculation?
so potentially if someone had a shorter dock, they get more credit for square footage they could put towards a shelter.
Okay, my question then becomes, in the memo, the staff memo, this applicant, well, I'll call the applicant, has 976 square feet. But was that based only on the terminal portion of their dock, or is that their entire dock? In other words, where do they end up, total square footage-wise, if we now include their entire dock over water?
Under this particular dock, it's 1,937 square feet.
Okay.
That's the
1,900?
or 1,937 square feet. That's the total dock plus terminal platform plus shelter footprint for the whole dock over water.
How long is that dock, approximately? It looked
I
like,
think it's about 200 feet or so, I believe, based on the drawings.
in fact, roughly it picked up 1,000 square feet by including not just the terminal portion of the dock, but the rest of the dock.
You know, part of it, when the state looks at the docks in the river proper, there's other requirements that come into play. You have to get your dock out to a certain water depth.
Mhm.
You have to do seagrass surveys and make sure that you're not putting your terminal platform and your boat slips over grass. So there's a few things that come into play when a dock is designed. I think Dr. Cox can add to that, who's the agent for the applicant who permits and reviews these docks as to the process. But I think that's all comes into play as far as the length of dock and the location.
I can see how this applicant's situation quickly adds up to 2,000, almost 2,000 square feet, because they have a long dock that goes way out there. But if someone has a short dock, I'm struggling to get my head around what the potential shelter can be here with 2,000 square feet of, you know, if you're on a canal and you got a little dock along the canal wall.
Well, that's when you get.
Does this thing start to become?
Well, that's when you get into the other requirements we have that we're still gonna have. For example, in canals, we have riparian setbacks, we have, if you have like a 70-foot wide canal, we have a requirement that says your dock structure cannot extend more than 25% of the total canal width. So you're gonna have limitations there because we have to preserve a navigable way and opportunity for other boat owners on the canal to navigate. So, and that's one of the things we considered. So it's unlikely that someone's gonna get, you know, a 2,000 square foot shelter in a canal because it just won't fit under, given the other requirements.
I did point to canals as my question, but along the seawalls at the end of the fingers or down, I think it's Indian River Drive, you go over the bridge in that first left, that sit right basically on the lagoon. Again, they can have a very small dock, maybe even no dock. And I'm thinking of a 50 by 40 allowed structure. That becomes pretty big, pretty obtrusive.
And then, no, and that's, we understand that, and we're trying to think of the various scenarios. The other thing we looked at was, or thought about was, you have actual physical constraints to how big boats can be that come up to a dock on a seawall. And those physical limitations are gonna limit the ultimate size of a boat. And the way it's written, it can only be essentially a little bit bigger than the boat as far as the shelter size. So those are some of the other factors that we think will help or will add to the limitation of ultimate size.
And I kind of ran through that mental process. Well, maybe it's a big boat, but it can't be more than 20 feet up, the roof of the shelter. And most big boats go more than 20 feet up. So it seems to me the more likely situation when you start pushing the larger shelters is the multiple docks. We have 2 docks here, but the multiple docks that just start to create almost like a small marina situation, and now you got a 50 by 40 or 35 or 30-foot roof over the thing. That would be permitted here, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, on single-family docks, you can only have, I believe, two slips.
Okay.
So let's just use the scenario of a seawall frontage right out on the lagoon. If you happen to have a deep water right next to the seawall, one limitation, you just get 2 slips combined would be essentially your biggest, 2 lifts combined with one roof would be the biggest scenario. And at that point, it can only overhang 1 foot beyond the combined boat lift and boat on dock of the 2 slips. You could still have some sizable boats if you could fit them up and get them up to your seawall. And then you'd still have setback requirements from your extended side property lines, it's like the riparian setback, so that's what you're dealing with. So you could have a fairly long, I mean, it's potentially that you could have, I don't know, 40, 50 foot long. The width is gonna be limited by the width of the boat, essentially, off the dock. And then you're still gonna have some required separation from your side property lines. But yes, you could have a pretty good size. But
This
just-
applicant's shelter or roof area, I know the terminal dock plus the roof equal 976, but what portion of that 976 was the shelter? I know it's probably on the drawing here, but
Well, 9076 is essentially the footprint of the shelter. I'm looking at the dimensions as we speak. Matter of fact, I can put this back up on the overhead. If you see that area in the middle, as I'm reading the notes, it looks like it's probably about 32 feet in length. Just as a reference point, let me just make sure. 21 feet. I don't know. Do you know, David? So the two combined are, one's 21 by 16, the other's 40 by 16. So we're talking roughly 50 feet long at the longest section, I believe.
And I'll tell you, I mean, I don't have a problem with what this applicant is proposing. That's not what scares me about this. What scares me is the small dock and the large shelter. And its appearance, what happens with the hurricanes. Now, I spend a fair amount of time on the lagoon with either my boat, paddleboards, kayaks, and you can go along the mangrove line and, you know, every 500 yards you're gonna come across a section of a dock that's kind of lodged up in the mangrove someplace. And the idea of these roofs, kind of, a big roof scares me. Is there any way that you can think of that either as a percentage basis or something, when you have a long dock like these people do, that, you know, you can have a reasonable shelter roof out there within the formula, but when you come back close, when you just have a short dock, we don't get into the situation of a large shelter area. Is there any way that you can think of to think through that?
One thought would be, just off the top, is if some reference that if it's, again, using the example of the seawall side parallel dock, maybe one point of reference is the length of the dock. It can't be longer than the dock itself. But you could, so you're cutting it back a little bit there. I think David might have some thoughts on that as a dock permit consultant, but yeah, that's one approach maybe, is to look at percentages.
Yeah.
We haven't really thought that through to give you a recommendation at this
You
point.
know, it's a stretch of a comparison, but to me, the state, I mean, you can go look around the state and find 30 and 40-story condominiums and on the water, office buildings, big structures. And the idea of a big boat shelter in that environment, to me, it doesn't upset anything because everything's big there. But we chose to limit our building sizes to 3 stories and 5 stories. We didn't want the big scale of things. And taking that rationale and coming over to this issue, I don't have a problem with with boat shelters. I don't have a problem, particularly if there's a long dock, that everything adds up to 2,000 square feet. But I do have a problem with a big shelter that is just oversized to our scale of things here in Indian River County. That's where I'm kind of ending up here. And I know it's difficult to think through that. But I'll stop talking.
I think I can provide you with a constraint that comes into play with situations, especially on the lagoon where you have seawall and you're going to have a short dock. You're not going to have very much water there. You're probably never going to have, well, DP won't, in an aquatic preserve, won't allow you to extend your terminal platform beyond 4 foot water depth, mean low water. So that's going to be your constraint. If you've got to stay 12 inches above the barren substrate, even if there's no seagrass. If there's seagrass, you have to stay, well, you're going to have to mitigate if you do build a terminal platform over seagrass, and the lowest part of your vessel has got to be 12 inches above the blades of the seagrass, which they say is 12 inches. So when you start adding all those things together, if you got 12 inches of seagrass, 12 inches clearance, there's 24 out of your 48. So your boat is not going to have a draft any greater than 24 inches if you've got 4 feet of water.
If you have those circumstances. I know there was about a 60-foot sport fishing boat that was parked at the end of the Fingers for quite a few years. People who owned that house sold it, and sold the boat and sold the house. But, I mean, that obviously demonstrates a capacity to have some pretty big boats in there. And again, whether they could have gotten under the 20-foot limitation, I don't know. But in any event, those are my thoughts and concerns. I don't know where else to go with it at this point.
So David, can you think of any situations where there would be no dock and you would have a 50 by 40 foot upper limit boat lift that could be built?
I don't think DEP would allow you to put a boat lift in without some form of facility for accessing the lift. I think in a situation like River Run condominiums, they might have a situation like that, where they have a walkway next to a seawall and boat lifts right there. But there you've got constraints that would also come into play in almost any canal situation where you're unlikely to have frontages that are very, very great, and you've got 25-foot setbacks off of each riparian line. So what you can do in that remaining envelope is pretty constrained.
The marinas that are linked up with subdivisions, as you come out of here, hit the Indian River Lagoon, and head north, before you hit the Wabasso Bridge, maybe a quarter mile back, they're on the right. Indian Trails and you see whatever. But could they put a roof over these things?
I suppose so. They could apply for permits, and but the regulations controlling multifamily residential marinas there's a whole different laundry list of requirements that control those facilities rather than single family.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Cox, just curious, if the concern is really the roofed area, that's the scale issue that's of concern, what would be the implication of, say, limiting the area covered by roof to, say, 1,000 square feet or something like that, to put a number on constraining the size of the roof area itself.
I have to actually look at what I have to calculate. It would limit the size of the vessel, for one thing. I'm not sure if you had, I think I'd have to actually get pen and paper out and figure that out. But one implication is you'd, of course, not be consistent with FDEP or the Army Corps, and that was one of the considerations. And that was driving this process. I think it's unlikely that, well, let me back up and say, I guess there are two concerns about the roofing. One, I think you were, Mr. Plakowicz, you were referring to, which was what happens during storms. Now these structures are going through the building department, and so they're built pretty solidly. I don't know a lot about the Florida Building Code, so I can't really address that. The other thing is that the boats on the boat lifts are already shading the bottoms, and in almost all cases the bottoms are barren in these locations, and which is perhaps an unfortunate thing, but and I'm not sure that there are a lot of other constraints, Stan. I mean, you could invoke 1,000 square foot limit.
Well, I don't really know that that would be fair without doing some further calculations. You don't want to inhibit people's property rights either. They buy these properties, they want to have a certain size boat, and we're making a decision right now without even knowing what we're going to limit them to.
And if you have a single-family residential property owner who has 2 slips, you can pretty quickly get to the situation, 400 square feet, you couldn't have a boat with a state-approved cover on it. You couldn't have a boat that was any longer than about 25 foot, including the engine. So that's a pretty strong limitation on what people are doing. And one of the reasons that more and more of these covered structures are starting to appear up and down the lagoon is that with the rise in property values of waterfront property, people who are buying those properties have the wherewithal to buy big boats, and that's what's happening.
Mr. Landers?
Mr. Plakowicz, do you have any other questions? I didn't know if you had any other questions. Well, the only comment I was going to make to the chairman's comment about 1,000 feet limiting people's rights, they bought their property. I mean, they bought their property under a currently existing 400 square foot limitation. So, I mean, it's really a question of how much we expand that. Do we go out to 5 times that, or 2.5 times that, or whatever?
To some degree, the state has already done this, and we're just being made aware of it.
Right, and I
We
thought,
purchased that property from that point to now, and we just weren't aware of why they purchased that property, because they knew there was new state laws, and that's probably why Mr. Gaudreau's came here and brought this before us for that reason. So, I mean, there's a lot of things going on right now, it seems to me.
and I thought the purpose of this exercise was to come in line with the Florida state, the 2,000 square foot Florida state statute.
I have questions.
Yeah, Mr. Landers, apologize.
Well, and actually one for the attorney regarding that, if a current property owner would be able to come in now and say, okay, the rules have changed, even though the county has this limitation, the state has this limitation, are we going to be able to enforce the rules we have in place?
I think we can enforce, well, we can enforce the rules we have in place. I mean, the concept is that the state has now set a broader limit, but as I was going through the Florida statutes, as we were sitting here, just to confirm the question I got from Mr. Polakowicz was, I haven't found anything in the statutes that said, you know, local governments, you can't restrict it to a smaller number. So right now, basically, the 400 number is the number that any property owner would have been subjected to and with limitations on their development.
And the aquatic preserve, I mean, in my layman's terms, is pretty much on the lagoon, not in the canals. Is that accurate?
Generally speaking, yeah, that's pretty much it.
I mean, because I'm seeing two different scenarios here where the wide open river frontage that this particular individual has, and there's quite a few others along Massey Road and some other locations as well, that they're self-limiting because the extent of the dock that they have to go out. But the major concern that I have has been raised is on these canals that are not on the aquatic preserve and don't need a long length of dock to get to the deep water. Very limited, but the private property rights issue goes twofold in the statement that if people become aware that they could do a larger area with a lift and coverage, all I'm looking down the Vero Isles area or the moorings, because there's deep water right off the edge, basically, in most cases, is your aesthetic value of going down the canal is completely blocked on both sides now by boathouses. So I have a concern with that. And I'm not sure that I would be in favor of one set of rules for the aquatic preserves and another set of rules for non-aquatic preserves to help protect everybody's rights. And I know you said you were limited by the size of the lot and setbacks, but there's quite a few lots, whether it's Vero Isles or the moorings, that are substantially wide lots. So that would allow them to do a fairly good-sized boathouse, if not the maximum size. You mentioned the building situation too, because I unfortunately was here during the hurricanes as well as most people were, but you know, I'm assuming they have to have the same wind load ratings as a structure does, so it's 140 miles an hour for those, so there's less of a concern from that. But I saw a lot of those docks that floated from one side of the river to the other, from storms in whether it was 04 or 2016, we saw that in some cases as well. So then that would allow, God forbid that happened, but those people would be able to come back in and enlarge their docking area or enlarge where the boat lift is, thereby allowing them to do another boathouse covering. So it becomes kind of a domino effect to me in a certain extent.
Well, you know, as its discussion progresses, consistency with the state, they're applying to the aquatic preserve, which is essentially the river itself. One option would be to just consider this adjustment in the preserve and not in the canals or outside the preserve. That way you'd still have the 400 square foot limit in the canals. That would not address if you have seawalled frontage right on the river still, but nevertheless, it's brings it consistent with the state.
And I appreciate that. I mean, if they are right on the river, whether it's Vero Isles / Fingers, I mean, you've got a wide open riverfront. If not, then you would be looking at, let's say, the moorings where they have condos that are 3 stories tall or whatever, that you're looking onto the harbor itself. And I mean, you're looking onto a lot of boats, imagining that with, and that's commercial, but the same effect, one individual in a single story home looking on his next door neighbor's boathouse that's 20 feet maximum height. I mean, there is an issue there that they didn't inherit.
You know, that's a good point. And also from a matter of scale, if a boathouse is 200 feet off the shoreline from a house versus right there next to them on the canal, there's a matter of scale. So that's, you know, understand that point.
That's all I have. Any further questions? None? I'll open up the public hearing. Anybody would like to speak, please stand up and be sworn in. I see no one. Close public hearing. Gentlemen, any further questions?
I had one other question, just, I'm sorry. Approximately I know this may be a tough question, but how many other people would be affected by this decision if we went to the 2,000 square foot carte blanche? I mean, how many dock owners are we talking about out there that have lifts on them that, I mean, you can always install a lift, so that's not really even a fair question. I mean, how many are we talking about that could change things at this point in time?
We haven't really gone through that calculation. We have noticed anecdotally that there are some shelters out there that one way or the other have gotten built that are a little bigger than the 400 square feet. We don't know if they just kind of happen to expand when there's dock repair after hurricanes, or whether it comes in after the permit's issued. We're kind of looking at that, but among other things, this would actually bring some shelters into conformance from a size standpoint on the river, from that perspective. But as far as scale of impact or how many shelters are out there or boat lifts, maybe Dr. Cox has an idea as involved in the application process, but
Well, in any given season, there are probably, I would guess, several dozen new docks being built along the river in Indian River County.
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. I'm thinking of the existing docks in place that would be able to,
There would be many dozens that could be affected if people wanted to go through the entire process. Most people want to avoid going through DEP and the Army Corps processes at all costs.
but if they have existing docks in place with existing boat lifts,
Getting a boat lift cover is trivially easy,
that's my concern.
but it is regulated by the same rules that Roland has mentioned.
One other question. This applicant has actually two different boat slips and lifts in play. Assuming you have a big enough seawall, is there any limitation on how many boat slips and lifts you can have to be covered by one of these roofs?
well, again, from a single-family dock standpoint, and as we define it, you really can't have more than 2 boat lifts.
I'm sorry, no more than?
The limitation is 2 boat lifts, so if you had a linear dock along a seawall, ultimately you can't have more than 2 boat slips or boat lifts associated with it.
Okay. I'm gonna just make a statement before we take a vote. I'm gonna vote against this, not because I have any problem with the applicant's situation, but I would just like to see it refined a little bit to prevent the very large roofs that or shelters that we've at least raised the prospect of. In this case, I don't think the shelter is unreasonably large. But, whether the number's 1,000 square feet, if I'm reading this correctly, these people, their roofs, shelters are 976 square feet. If we came to a number like, however, the shelter itself shall not exceed 1,000 square feet, they'd be fine. The prospect of having a large shelter that becomes unsightly, becomes a hurricane issue, et cetera, is eliminated, or at least reduced, I should say. So I just kind of lay that out there.
Anything further, gentlemen? Can I get a motion of some sort?
well, I guess the question,
Sure.
would you be receptive to existing rules for these non-aquatic reserve areas and allowing it to be as requested in an aquatic reserve area? Because the variation is the length of the docks on most of these areas. I mean, you've got to go a ways out before you can get to water sufficient for any boat.
Well, I guess I would have a concern. It would be something to have to look at further because, again, it's the seawalls directly on the Indian River, not the canals that concern me so much, because most of the canals, just because of the other restrictions, the 25%, whatever it is, you can't get too big. But the seawalls directly on the intercoastal, I think those are in the aquatic preserve, aren't they?
Actually, the area that comes to mind when you talk about that is the moorings, essentially, where you have relatively deep water right up, at least on the outer seawalls, at the anchor and so on. But even then, I think technically the moorings owns some of that bottomland, so I'm not even sure if that's in the aquatic preserve right up against the wall. But other than the moorings type area, I'm having a hard time thinking of an area where you have,
What about Indian River Drive? If you drive over the Merrill Barber Bridge, take that left, all those properties along the left side, that seawall, and Pepper Tree is, not Pepper Tree, but what's the one down a little bit further that, again, has a seawall right on the intercoastal, not the intercoastal waterway, but in the lagoon, let me say, right on the face of the lagoon.
Bethel.
Pebble Beach,
Pebble Bay.
Pebble Bay, that's what I'm thinking of.
yeah, I'm not
There's a
sure
bunch
that's
of
in
right
our,
along there.
technically, I think that's in the, not in our jurisdiction, it's in the municipality. So that one, this wouldn't apply, this would only be unincorporated county. And again, in the unincorporated county, really, the moorings, most of the other areas, either it's gonna be too shallow to get a boat of any size right up to the shoreline, or it's, the moorings is what I can
Your
think of.
Shores is not, I mean, that's all canals, basically.
Right, that's where
River
you,
Shores, I mean, I think there was one or two properties that might be out there that would apply to the seawall that we're talking about. A lot of the stuff out on Indian River Drive in the north end, and, I mean, there's really not a whole lot of seawall in most cases anyway.
most of them are this type of situation where you've got them reaching out, same thing on the Amber Sand Beach. You're coming off the beach way out into the water to get your depth. So, this would not apply in the city limits of Sebastian, where there's a series of docks.
What about, well, Indian River Shores, I mean, there's estuary,
Again, this would not apply in the Indian River Shore, so,
we're only talking the county, and then, which still, the moorings would be one concern, obviously.
And I don't know what the solution is, but I would basically, by my action, I'm basically sending a signal that I would like staff to look into that question of is there, some way of, number one, being reasonable on this thing, but at the same time, number two, trying to avoid the big structures that, well, we've talked about in the past.
Right, and I think, based on all the comments, the concern is the scale of the roofed area close to shore.
Well, it's gonna have to be, because if you have to get a dock to take it out there, the square footage of the dock is gonna limit that 2,000.
Correct, correct. Now, that's the one scenario, even within the aquatic preserve, and again, we can check and see. That could be part of a recommendation, or however you guys wanna structure things.
We could limit the size of the over-roof structures to 1,000 square feet, and we can make a motion to that too. So therefore, you're never gonna have anything that has a roof over it that's over 1,000
Well,
square feet.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and I guess what I'm hesitant to do is lock into a motion a solution which staff has not yet analyzed. Because I'd like staff to analyze whatever solution goes from here to the Board of County Commissioners. I'll make a motion. Let me think through this a little bit. I'll make a motion that we approve this agenda item with a recommendation that staff analyze analyze the possible solutions to limit the overall size of the shelter itself to something that is not obtrusive or unreasonably large.
Okay, so I have that motion, do I have?
Well, does that analysis have to be done prior to this going up to
No.
Board of County Commissioners?
It doesn't have to, but frankly, in the interest of efficiency, I would like to see staff analyze that and perhaps come forth with a recommendation to the county commissioners saying, we have analyzed it, here's our proposal, and therefore there's only one hearing.
I'll second that.
A motion and a second by Dr. Day, all in favor?
Question.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The last couple of words that I heard were of concern to me, which was, if you could rephrase it, something about obtrusive and, what was the other term?
I think I probably said unreasonably large.
Unreasonably large is what you said.
Yeah.
And those are both terms that are very subjective to me.
Well, and intentionally so, because it generally defines the parameters of what I'm asking staff to look at without trying to, overly limit them. So it is intentionally broad. I think staff is hearing our concerns, and let them use their expertise within those general things. Large scale, too large a shelter presents some concerns. So can you look at it from a planning standpoint and propose something that tries to address those concerns?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
So whatever recommendation along the lines that you're considering now that you would make, staff would certainly do the analysis, and that would be part of what would be reported to the Board of County Commissioners. So that would go hand in hand. And what we're hearing is potentially in some scenarios, after staff analyzes it further, if there are some cases where there is such a large shelter itself within the aquatic preserve that we look at something, 2,000 square foot covered shelter is considered obtrusive and unreasonably large, based on the discussion. That's what we've heard.
50 feet by 40
Sure,
feet
exactly.
strikes me as
Right.
something larger
So
than we want.
that's what staff would take away from the input, and if the motion is passed. And we would look at something that would pare that down in terms of what would be reported to the Board of County Commissioners.
But I would have concerns with that because it, again, is so subjective that, forgive the attorney next to me, but I think there would be two attorneys generally involved as a potential, what's considered obtrusive and what's considered.
Agreed. With staff's analysis, we'd have to come up with a number.
What I'm
A
hearing.
number, a proportion, something quantifiable, something objective.
Yeah.
Please.
And I noticed even back in I think it was back in the 1991 minutes, there was some reference by staff that it unreasonably large and obtrusive. I think that's the word you used back in 1991, if I'm remembering correctly. So that's why I'm kind of grabbing on that. It's a concept that's been around, as something to be avoided.
Right.
So within that concept, put it to something quantifiable.
Right, and that's what we're dealing with now. What we have in the code, what came out of 91 was a quantifiable sort of criterion, and that's what staff would prefer going forward, whatever the change, if any, might be.
I think that's what we're looking for, something like that, not just the terms,
Correct.
obtrusive or large scale.
We take the,
Some sort of number, some sort of scale that determines what that is.
right, so staff has taken that direction as not obtrusive, not unreasonably large, as just an instruction that would be part of the analysis. But we would want to see something objective.
And is this an analysis you think you could do?
We will, first of all, this is an application from an applicant, so we'll get with the applicant too, to go over the analysis and see what would be affected. And we get that done before it goes to the board.
What I think what Alan was trying to say is he's not objecting to this applicant's application. He wants that to move forward, but to change our LDRs, he wants to have something more quantifiable than just
Right, so we have to play,
1,000 square foot.
correct.
That would be built right there up on the seawall is what he doesn't want with a roof over it.
We have to play out the potential scenario that was discussed that would be considered out of scale.
And the concern that the chairman just mentioned is why I couched it in terms of we approve this agenda item. If this was just an application to build this one dock, I don't think we'd have a problem with it. It's, you know, this is a legislative matter. We're making a law that's going to apply across
Correct.
the county, so it's the prospect of something down the road that concerns us, concerns me anyways.
Okay, so, Dr. Day, do you have anything?
No, I think we've got a motion and a second.
Yes, so we have a motion by Alan, basically approving this agenda item, asking staff to analyze possibility of addressing obtrusive or large-scale boathouses up against the seawall areas. What's your pleasure, gentlemen? Can I have a vote? Approval, not approval? What do we got? Motion to?
Got a motion to approve?
We've got a motion and
to
a
approve,
second.
guys? I know motion to approve. I'm not saying I'll finish. I'm tired, buddy. All in favor, say aye. I'm done. I've been up for around 18 hours already. You guys are killing me. 18, so motion to approve? Everybody in
Aye.
favor? Aye?
Nay.
Disapprove?
No.
Aye, okay. No, I said all approved? No, I said there's no nays. No nays.
No, I
No
know
nays.
there was. There wasn't.
I didn't hear- I'm sorry, Chip. One nay, Chip. Mr. Lander is opposed. Okay, next matter. Commissioners' matters, any? None? Okay. Planning matter, Stan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it looks like we will not need to meet on May 23rd, but we will be meeting on June 13th, so just ask you to continue to block that out on your calendars, and that's all that I have.
All right, thank you, sir.
Very good.
Attorneys' matters. None.
None to offer tonight.
Meeting adjourned.